All right, here we go with game number 3 from chapter 4. In this game, we're going to see an early knight to c3 by white.
Which is a really common idea, and it's a little bit annoying because it disrupts our normal plan, which is bishop d6, queen c7, but at a cost. And that cost is that d4 is far weaker than it is when there's a pawn on c3. So, I mean, often we can maybe kind of play a6 and then ignore it and try to go for a regular plan. But it's worth noting that we should maybe think a lot more seriously about putting pressure on d4, as we're going to see in this game.
So two plans to keep in mind, pressure d4 or a6 in the regular plan. All right, bishop d6, bishop g5, hitting our queen. But we still get our regular move, knight e7, d2, castle. And here we could play a6, right? So this is the point where a6, queen c7, perfectly fine plan for black.
Yeah, and then f6, and then that comes with tempo, and like it'd be a normal, totally acceptable way to play.
Instead, black castles, rook f to e1. Now white's kind of wishing that c2 pawn were on c3, just creating that nice pawn chain, solid pawns on d4. Maybe their queen helps guard b2. But here, this is going to cause a little bit of an issue for white, isn't it?
Yeah, because I mean, we already can just win a pawn. We can just take directly on f3 right now, and then we're going to follow it up with queen to b6, and you can't guard everything.
And this is just kind of an example line of how you could try to guard everything. Knight out to a4. But what's going to happen after we drop the queen back, we can grab the knight, and now we have all of these ideas, right? We have knight e7, knight f5 coming up. We have the c5 square well under control, and the a4 knight doesn't have an easy escape route.
I
So,
mean, we could even consider just playing b6 and just saying, move your knight somewhere.
yeah. And again, we've seen this a4 knight being stuck out there before. Not what white wants in this position. So even if we're not winning the pawn immediately, this is the way that white can try to hold it, but they have to make some huge concessions positionally, sticking that knight out on a4.
Yeah, I kind of do like that white didn't choose, or black didn't choose to go for this immediately, and opted instead to maybe just kind of build up and keep this idea in the tanks.
Yeah, and we've kind of talked about this game after game now, haven't we? Like allowing that pressure to build. I do agree with you because look at this h6. White makes a blunder on the very next move, or at least a large mistake. Bishop back to f4. What's so bad about this one?
Well, it drags the queen away, and the queen was kind of necessary whenever we were looking at defending on the queen side. And some of those earlier lines that white was sort of tangling themselves to hold on to the pawn. Well, now they can't even tangle.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So a move like knight to a4 does not guard the d pawn. So
You can
which
kind of forgive white for not taking on e7 instead, because that just hand us the bishop pair.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what else could white have tried? Okay, so let's go back to this position. Let's say white takes on e7. That's the strongest move. But after knight takes, bishop pair, like you said, and I feel like white really has no counterplay for that bishop pair.
Yeah, and I think that we can also really make this knight kind of awkward on c3, because we can play bishop to g3, we can play rook to c8, and then it's difficult to even move that knight.
Okay, so
Or maybe
maybe,
and follow that up with here with and take care of this pin. And I feel like we're going to get a lot of pressure and probably going to end up winning a pawn anyway on the c3 or c2 square.
I agree with you. So I was just thinking maybe white could try to get rid of the bishop pair immediately with moving the knight on f3, like knight to h4.
Hmm.
Um,
But so like last time he tried to hold on the pawn by putting a knight on the rim, and so now he's going to do it again.
yes. So let's look at, like, let's say bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, bishop to b4, like you said, rook to c8 up next. We got all that queenside pressure, and white has nothing in return. So bishop pair, or we still have a lot of queenside pressure coming.
Yeah, and this knight's going to have to come home at some point, and once it does, I think we're going to set knights on f5.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, so let's go back to the game move. Bishop to f4. Bishop takes f4, queen takes, bishop takes f3, and now we see queen to b6. Dual attack, pawn on b2, and pawn on d4. By the way, white's a 2200. Black is 2,600. So we're kind of seeing a GM outplay a master here.
Quite handedly.
So knight e2 played, giving up the b pawn. And I think this move does make some sense for white. He knows he's giving up at least one pawn. He's going to try to fight back on the b file and get a little bit of counterplay with rook e to b1. But after queen
Which is the
takes, go ahead.
So we're still up a pawn, and now we're up a pawn with targets. Like the d4 pawn. This almost feels like it came out of the exchange, or not the exchange, the advanced variation, where we end up with this pawn on d4 that we can hit. Actually, there's so many lines where we end up with a pawn on d4 that we can hit.
It's an advance, but white's missing the e5 pawn. You're exactly right.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is an advance with no e5 pawn.
Hmm.
So we can play rook a c8 was played in the game. Rook a to b8 is actually even stronger. Just immediately kind of contesting the b file.
Yeah, and forcing a trade of rooks, which I think we should be quite happy with.
Yeah. But we're getting a little bit nitpicky. I think rook a c8 is still good, still an open file. After a3, see queen to f5 by black. Not just your average queen trade. It's a queen trade that weakens the d4 pawn in the end.
Yeah, it's a queen trade that just wins the d4 pawn.
Right.
If you trade queens, you're just losing the pawn.
Take,
I think.
attempt, rook to d1. I think what's going to happen here is black will be able to maneuver a rook around to attack that pawn, right? Because we have an extra rook. And white's going to have to commit to g4 at some point, making a new weakness. This is not going to be good for white.
No, I don't think so at all.
So queen to d6 was played by white. And now queen to f6, putting more pressure. We always talk about pressure. Black can immediately take this pawn in a lot of cases because the e7 knight falls. But we have knight f5 in mind, forking the queen and the pawn on d4. So rook to c7 played. And here black finally takes. Knight takes d4, up 2 pawns at this point.
Yeah, and okay, fine. If you win my knight on e7, then I'm going to take on f3 with check, and then I'm going to pick up your rook on a8.
Oh yeah, and those are ugly pawns for white.
And our f7 point is perfectly strong, and we can just trade off one of your rook immediately if we wanted to.
Yeah.
And then now you have no threats whatsoever. We can take on a3, and ugly. This has got to be this is an unlosable. It's almost an not winnable.
Yeah, something like that, right? 3 pawns and the exchange in this perfectly safe king. What more could we ask
and
for?
and a really unsafe king for the opponent.
Yes, exactly right. So black takes. White went for knight takes d4 back. And now I like this move. So you might think at first queen takes d4 is the natural reply. Still hits the rook on a1.
I think that's fine, but I think this is better.
Yeah, knight to f5. We're just saying, hey, we're going to keep this strong knight on the board, winning the knight on d4 on the next move. And so white doesn't want any of that. They could have tried to move their rook off of a1. They take f5, allowing this, trade the rooks, and now finally snap the knight off. So here we have an exchange and 2 pawns, right? So 4 points up in terms of material.
Yeah.
But white is trying to make a little bit of a fortress and fight for a bit of counterplay. Do you think white has any chances here to hold?
No, I think the d pawn is way too strong. I think that if you take the pawn on a7, I think I can just centralize my own queen. I'm going to play rook d8, and I'm just going to shove my pawn up the board.
And that's what happened in the game. You say the rook gets behind, pawn starts marching. But what about taking the d pawn?
Okay, you're going to play bishop takes.
Yes.
I still think that so now I'll just play queen d4, defend the a7 pawn, hit the bishop.
And f2. F2 is a really important pawn to guard the king.
Yeah, if we lose f2, then there's going to be yeah, now it's a lot easier to create more pass pawns on the king side now. And I probably just look to try to trade queens somehow. And if I can trade queens, this is going to be super easy.
You know, I also do like the idea of taking a3 and saying, okay, I got this pass pawn. Because in the other line, we didn't have a pass pawn. So it depends. Do you want to attack the white king, take f2? Or do you want to take a3, have a passed pawn? Both of these are completely winning for black.
You're right, because in the other line, we were going to have to move our kingside pawns to win. Like we're probably, well, yeah, it seems like we're probably going to have to move our kingside pawns maybe. Or we could get into some trouble on our king side, but because we can't just advance the a pawn. Whereas the line where we took on a3, we can probably just post up somewhere and just move the a pawn up the board and have a comfortable, safe, clean winning plan.
Yeah, I agree with you. So this is probably the simpler one. All right, so this was a really crushing game. I think black just tactically outplayed his opponent. In terms of key takeaways, what point would you want to stop at?
I do think that just recognizing the difference of the knight being on c3 instead of a pawn and how that changes the white position, and just being aware that that very different kind of position because of what it does to d4, I think is the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of that, this bishop takes f3 and queen to b6 combo seemed to be in the air multiple moves in a row, and black did end up using it in the end to win a pawn. So that's game number
And it,
3. One game left of the chapter, JD, and then we have to leave your favorite chapter, the exchange.
it's okay. We'll just have to make a new favorite chapter.
Yeah, that's true. Each and the next one will be the next favorite. All right,
Yeah,
see you
yeah.
guys in game 4.